Time is of the essence. The rhythms break, more varied and subtle than any kind of dance. Movement speeds up or lags. The ball goes out in sharp and angular drives or long, slow arcs. Comes in again, controlled and under aim. The players wheel or spurt, race, stoop, slide, halt, shift imperceptibly to new positions, watching the signs according to the batter, the score, the inning. Time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. The shadow moves from the plate to the box, from the box to second base, from second to the outfield, to the bleachers. Time is of the essence. The crowd and players are the same age always, but the man in the crowd is older every season. Come on, play ball.
For a large and varied group of Americans during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, baseball was the national institution. It was a time when the game's presence was everywhere and meant everything. It permeated our soul and elevated our heart. From the Depression through the 1950s, baseball's popularity was far-reaching and undeniable, and its heroes were among the icons of our society. Writer Donald Hoenig.
You think of a young DiMaggio in the 30s, and if you're so inclined, you can think of him being part of what was almost a regal dynasty in this country with FDR in the White House and Joe Louis, heavyweight champion, and Ernest Hemingway shooting lions in Africa, and Joe DiMaggio in center field for the Yankees. This is one of the magical ingredients of baseball, that it's able, just by the mention of a team or a name, it's able to evoke an era. These memories just go up in your mind like a galaxy.
Often, baseball brings to life a specific era that is firmly rooted in the experience of youth. We think back to a time when life's natural progression takes hold, and we learn the game from our fathers or grandfathers and begin to embrace it and the dreams that go with it. Author Robert Creamer.
Kids played ball. Kids played ball from the time they were little, and they played all spring and summer and fall. It was the game. It was in my backyard, and my back stoop was sort of a cement stoop with a iron rail on it, and we used to go up and sit down there when it was too hot and it felt like the dugout. And I always remember thinking that what I wanted to do more than anything else was to be a ball player so I could sit in the dugout in Yankee Stadium on a hot day. It must have seemed safe and fun, and the dugout symbolized it. The dugout was a place where you could be with your friends, the ball team. It just seemed like the most marvelous place in the world to be.
It's doubtful that anyone who fantasizes about the life of a major leaguer takes into account the road through the minor leagues. In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that road was well traveled. There were hundreds of minor league teams and thousands of players hoping to get their chance. Donald Hoenig.
The Cardinal farm system consisted of, at its peak, of 50 teams, about 800 players. That's just the Cardinals. Every small town seemed to have an A&P and a Cardinal farm club in there. And this was just thrown out all over the country, in the most out-of-the-way backwater towns. And this is where they began and had to fight their way up.
In an era when the major leagues didn't exist west of St. Louis, one minor league was special. The Pacific Coast League had teams in cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, and in many ways was a West Coast equivalent of the majors. Infielder Dario Lodigiani.
There was a lot of ball players in those days that were playing in the Coast League that could have still been playing in the major leagues. And there were some of the ball players that were playing in the Coast League were making anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 a year. So to play up there in the big leagues and wondering, fighting every day whether you got a job or not, you come out here in the Coast League and you knew that you could play out here. And you felt a little more secure, and the pay was good.
Outfielder Gus Zernial.
In the Coast League, we had a lot of guys that made more money than guys in the big leagues. In fact, when I went to the big leagues the first time, they asked me to take a cut. Why should I go to the big leagues for $5,000 when I'm making $8,000 in the Coast League?
While the Coast League treated its players well, for most, the decision of whether or not to leave wasn't a difficult one to make. After all, it was still the minor leagues. Not that the minors weren't home to recognizable faces, like Chuck Connors in Montreal, or his Dodger farmhand teammate, Tommy Lasorda. But like most of their colleagues, they would have jumped at the chance to play in the major leagues. Outfielder, Harry Walker.
Walker Cooper and I just finished our season in Columbus, and we drove all night to get there. Then we went to the ballpark the next morning, and I was excited to get out there to play. I can't remember too much except that I signed a contract for next year and didn't even know it, for a lot less money than we had agreed that I would do. It was really exciting to me. I mean, it was a tremendous thrill to play, and I didn't even think about what money was. I just thought I'm getting to play in the big league.
There were, of course, other prospective major leaguers who were more concerned about signing their contracts and didn't hesitate to confront their employers. Infielder, Alex Grammas.
Dear Mr. Paul, I received your letter and contract which called for the same monthly salary of $700 per month and read with great interest all that you had to say regarding my 1953 salary. I want you to know that I'm very grateful for the chance to make the Cincinnati team. It's something that all ball players set as their goal, and in this respect, I'm no exception. I want to play big league ball. I have no intention of knocking around in the minors until I'm too old to make a start in some other field. Mr. Paul, on the other hand, I do feel that I'm entitled to a little more consideration concerning my monthly salary. I can truthfully say that I'm in no way trying to be bullheaded or belligerent. It's definitely not one of my traits. It's just that I honestly feel that I had a year that deserves more. Mr. Paul, I'm willing to meet you halfway and settle for $850. I'm enclosing my unsigned contract and hoping that my new proposal will meet with your approval.
Even though Gabe Paul eventually gave Grammas his $850 a month, it was still clear for most he couldn't put a price on the player's love for the game. Catcher, Joe Garagiola.
When they gave me my own uniform, I mean, this may sound sacrilegious, but I'm sure it must be like when the Pope gives the vestments to make somebody a real cardinal. And it was just like it should have been a ceremony. It should not have been a clubhouse guy just handing me the uniform. It should have said, here it is, your hometown team. You are a Cardinal.
Still, at a time when most players were forced to accept management's take-it-or-leave-it attitude, life in the majors was not for the faint of heart. Pitcher, Eldon Auker.
When I went up with the Tigers, he said, you're going to be a starting pitcher. And he said, I want to tell you my philosophy. He said, when I pay a pitcher to start a ball game, I expect him to pitch the entire ball game. He said, I can't afford to pay one guy to start the game and one guy or two guys to finish the game. He said, I expect you to pitch the entire ball game. I don't care whether it's 9 innings or 10 innings or 12 innings. He said, that's your problem, and you get yourself in shape for that. Now, if you can't go it, well, he said, I'll get somebody who can. It was that simple.
Hall of Famer, Enos Slaughter.
I came in from right field one night, and the third base dugout was a long ways back, and I walked. And he says, kid, if you're tired, I'll get you some help. And from 1936 through 1961, I hit the top step running going to the outfield, and I hit the top step running coming in. And I continued that the rest of my career.
Whether it came from management or teammates, intimidation was something that a rookie had to overcome if he wanted to remain in the major leagues. New York Yankee, Tommy Henrich.
there is a doubt in your mind whether you're really sound enough to be in the big leagues. You got a decent reputation, but you're always wondering, is some guy gonna beat me out? At least I felt that way. But you do reach a point after a while, you say, I don't care who they got. They ain't gonna take my job. I'm here. I'm not only here, I belong here.
Who says romance is gray with age, that men no longer battle odds, when two raw kids from brush and sage still face the lightning of the gods? Can life be stupid, drab, or slow, with dizzy Dean and schoolboy roll?
During the Great Depression, businesses closed with regularity, but not baseball. In fact, in those dreary days, the fans who came out to the game found that there was nothing depressing at all about spending time at the ballpark. Pitcher, Mel Harder.
In 1929, they had the stock market crash, and then along about 1933, the banks closed, and we were in bad shape then. And we knew what we had to do. We had to scrape and save, and the $375 I made here in Cleveland in 1928 carried me right through pretty good. But I had a lot of friends from Omaha that was on a WPA for months, where I think that their salary was about $1.25 a day, just pushing a rake or shovel on boulevards and everything. Some of the clubs noticed the lack in attendance, but they decided to go ahead and play baseball because it helped the fans and the people to take their minds off of their problems.
In the late 20s and early 30s, if fans couldn't get to the stadium to see the games, then the players took the game to the fans. Even Babe Ruth joined the era of barnstorming. In the late 20s, Ruth and his Yankee teammate Lou Gehrig spent part of the off-season traveling around the country with two teams that competed against each other. Of course, Ruth and Gehrig weren't the only ones out on the road. Many players barnstormed during the Depression, and although it made for a tough life, those were tough times, and it was still a good way to make a little extra money. Hall of Famer Charlie Gehringer.
We had some good teams that went through Canada and went to the coast and went to all parts of the country that didn't have baseball. Usually it was hometown setups, and I don't think we ever lost a ball game. We just, the fans enjoyed seeing us, and of course to see their own players try to compete. We did pretty well, picking up a few bucks, made probably more in a month there than we did in the last month of the season. Yeah, could buy 2 suits.
Several times during the 30s, some of baseball's best-known players barnstormed in Japan. But it was a lesser-known catcher named Moe Berg who made the most out of his trips. Berg traveled to Japan twice, first in 1932 to teach the game, the second time in 1934, from which Berg, under the cover of baseball, learned enough about Tokyo as a spy to aid the Allied cause in World War II. Charlie Gehringer.
He had a camera with him all the while, and he was taking shots here and there, and most of them off the field, so to speak, not concerning baseball. So I had a feeling that he was trying to hunt something up, running that camera almost constantly somewhere. And people later, of course, when the war came on, said, well, this guy was picking our pockets over in Japan.
off, I hear the rolling, roaring cheers. They come to me from many yesterdays, from record deeds that cross the fading years and light the landscape with their brilliant plays. The long line forms through life's remembered years. The flaming heart, cold brain, and firm command of nerve and sinew blotting out all fears. The will to win beyond the final stand. These are the factors in each hour of need that mark the pathway of the winning breed.
Who's gonna win the pennant this year? That's what they all wanna know. Which is the team that'll take the flag? Which is the team they won't stop? I'm a baseball fan, a red-hot fan. It's a subject I never can drop. Who's gonna win the pennant this year? Who's gonna come out on top?
Do you think that the Giants or Cubs will come through?
And what do you figure the Dodgers will do?
They tell me the Cardinals look pretty hot.
They tell me the Yankees may take it this fall.
They all look good and I can't make my mind up.
So once again I repeat, oh, who's gonna win the pennant this year? That's what they all wanna know. Which is the team that'll take the flag? Which is the team they won't stop? I'm a baseball fan, a red-hot fan.
In an era in which there were just 16 teams in the major leagues, the question of who would win the pennant should have provided a variety of answers. In truth, however, season after season, only a few teams in both leagues were consistently successful. The top of the standings were nearly always the private domain of baseball's privileged few. Robert Creamer.
Teams like the Yankees were there year after year, and there was a sense of continuity, a sense of permanence, a sense of almost of security. If you were a Yankee fan, you felt very secure. Your team was going to win all the time. And I suppose it's that way in other places. In St. Louis, people rooting for the Cardinals had that feeling year after year they were going to have somebody to root for. You had a lousy job, and your wife was cranky, and the kids were no good, but you rooted for the Cardinals, and they won. And it gave you a little sense of being important, holding on.
In the 1950s, Casey Stengel's New York Yankees held on to more pennants than any other team, continuing a championship march that methodically began in the mid-30s under manager Joe McCarthy. Eldon Auker.
McCarthy, New York Yankees, he wouldn't allow a player on his team to smoke a pipe because his philosophy was that a pipe smoker was complacent. He said, I don't want any complacent ball players on there. And he didn't have any either.
Author Ralph Schoenstein.
They used to say to Joe McCarthy, he says, you know, Joe, you're a wonderful manager. He says, I'm sure a genius. He says, every day I write down Henrik, Keller, DiMaggio, Ralph, Dickey, and you should see what happens. For 10 years, those same 8 guys played every game. They played. They never missed games.
Gus Zernial.
They went out to beat you, and they would tell you they were going to beat you, and they played to beat you. It didn't make any difference if they were 20 games in front or they had you beat by 9-0. They still tried to kick your brains out, and they pretty much did so.
In a 29-year span from 1936 to 1964, the Yankees won 22 American League titles and 16 World Championships. They were, without a doubt, the most successful and recognizable team in all of sport. Their fame carried throughout the world, even to Japan, where the Yankees were welcomed as heroes on a postseason trip in the mid-50s. It was a privilege to wear a Yankee uniform, and unheard of to willingly give it up. In 1946, Joe DiMaggio once playfully wore the colors of the Red Sox, but once a player put on the pinstripes, no other uniform could possibly fit as well. Tommy Henrich.
the Browns better never make a trade for me to come here for somebody. And he says, why? I says, because I ain't showing up in this ballpark.
That subject I never can drop. Who's gonna win the pennant this year? Who's gonna come out on top?
If the Giants win but 2 of 4, and the Dodgers 6 of 10, the Phillies, as in days of yore, will finish last again.
During the 30s, 40s, and 50s, baseball had a clearly defined class structure, a classic struggle between the haves and the have-nots. For teams like the Philadelphia A's and Philadelphia Phillies, life near the cellar was an annual occurrence, each season a humbling cycle of resignation and defeat. Donald Honig.
Those teams were doomed. The Phillies were in the second division, I think something like 30 out of 32 years, something like that. The Boston Braves weren't much better. And the St. Louis Browns, one year, this season's attendance was about, I think, 86,000 for the season. So how could those teams ever hope to achieve any success? They were just cemented at the bottom.
At the heart of the problem was money. Without it, you couldn't afford quality players. And without quality players, you couldn't win. Such was the case with the poorer clubs, like the Boston Braves. And certainly baseball's most noted failures, the St. Louis Browns. Harry Walker.
The only way they operated was sell ball players. And the Browns, that's why the Browns never really got off the ground, because every year they'd be in debt for their rooms and their transportation. And the Yankees, if somebody that had pretty good money, would say, look, we'd like to have your third baseman. Well, I said, well, he's our best player. Well, I know that, but that's why we want him. And they'd finally beat him down and say, you owe $200,000. You can't start the season unless you pay these debts, because nobody's going to let you have room for transportation. So they'd have to sell a ball player for a couple of $100,000, a little better, and get 2 ball players that sit on the bench with the Yankees that never did play with them either.
Infielder Johnny Berardino.
When you get down to the end of the season on a losing ball club, you can't wait for the season to be over. You know, the Yankees were customarily, they sent a little bonus money to the fellas that were in the service, who had to leave the team going to the service. And I remember the St. Louis Browns sent me a deck of playing cards with their logo on it. And I gotta tell you, I was so infuriated, I took that deck of cards and I flipped them all over the Hawaiian Islands.
Not that it was any better playing for Connie Mack's Philadelphia A's. Dario Lodigiani.
Well, the A's, you just went out there and hope you survived. I mean, that's the way it was. You know, you had a second division ball club, and you didn't have the kind of club that was going to, say, beat the Yankees or beat the Red Sox of Detroit or anything like that. Although we weren't a winning ball club, I enjoyed playing there. It was a lot of fun playing against all those top clubs. But as far as thinking that we were going to win a pennant, if we won 3 or 4 games in a row, that was a tremendous streak.
Even the advertisements around the stadium told the story of the haves and the have-nots. Joe Garagiola.
I love signs on the wall. Of course, in St. Louis, they had a star of the game. They might as well have just imprinted Musial there and left it there, because he did it most of all. But the Lifebuoy sign, that brings back memories of the Philadelphia part. They had the Lifebuoy sign up there, and said the Phillies use a Lifebuoy, and somebody had written in their graffiti style, and they still stink.
For the Senators, or Browns, or Phillies, or A's, it was always, wait till next year. Not that the next year would ever be any different, but hope springs eternal in each baseball fan. Poet Donald Hall.
We play this every day. And toward the end of August, you know, you're 12 games behind, or you're 20 games behind in the loss column. What can you do? You go out to the park and watch the game. There aren't so many people there. You just watch the game going on, and you wait till next year. Hope comes along. You read about some kids out of high school playing in single A, some double A players who might come up to triple A, and you think, well, maybe we'll put it together next year. This seems to be the sport for defeat, but defeat with hope. We accept defeat and rush hope in.
Sometimes I feel like I will never stop. Just go on forever. Till one fine morning, I'm going to reach up and grab me a handful of stars, swing out my long, lean leg, and whip 3 hot strikes burning down the heavens, and look over at God and say, how about that?
Baseball is a game for dreamers. Its ebbs and flows conducive to using your imagination. Donald Hall.
There are wonderful pauses in the game of baseball. I love the moment just before the pitch, when the batter is all attent and coiled and no longer wagging his bat, and the pitcher is leaning forward just before he rocks back. You get that again and again, and you don't breathe at that moment. Everything is halted. And then, God knows, for the most part, hundreds of times in a game, virtually nothing happens. The batter looks on, it's a strike or it's a ball, we go back and wind up again. We wind up this toy, and then it is set to spring, and then it springs, and goodness knows. People are running on the base paths, everything, all hell is breaking loose. And just for a minute, less than a minute, just a few seconds, and then we come back to pause again. It's a magic and mystical moment.
In the time before television, a fan who hadn't listened to the game on the radio would get the first recap of those magical and mystical moments with the arrival of the daily newspaper. There, baseball was well chronicled and eloquently described by some of the most gifted writers in the business. Ralph Schoenstein,
Red Smith, and Bill Hines, and Jimmy Cannon, and Bill Corum, and Frank Graham. These people had their own voices. You grabbed the paper. And of course, the box scores were the wonderful things. And a box score was like a holy relic. And you would pore over them, and you'd see the players of the long names who had the, apostrophe Cuccinello, C, apostrophe H, apostrophe L, which was wonderful. We had kids who had scrapbooks of box scores. They'd paste them all in.
Donald Hall.
People would, of course, learn how to tip their cap in particular ways or swing the bats in particular ways because they'd heard them described, first in newspapers, later in the radio. And my grandfather in New Hampshire, he followed the game in the newspapers. So he would think of Ted Williams. He thought of Ted Williams for 25 years without ever seeing him.
There were times, however, when those newspaper descriptions were embellished or exaggerated, sprung by a writer on an often gullible public thirsting for information. Playwright Stephen Longstreet.
They were great storytellers. They were very picturesque. But you'd hear wonderful stories about this kid, barefooted kid who came out of the Azores and invented this ball because he used to knock crows out of the trees to keep them from eating the corn, and he developed this great arm. And none of this was true, but these were wonderful stories.
While it was true that aside from game summaries, most newspapermen used their imagination freely, circumstances also dictated that they use their discretion. Writer Haywood Hale Broun.
There were 9 newspapers in New York when I became a baseball writer. And we traveled as a group. And there is no doubt we were the house writers. Then if there were scandals, we did not write them because it would not be fair to our boys. It was all very cozy. And the players were not distanced from us by the hugeness of their salaries. It was much more intimate, the relationship between player and writer when I began, but there was still the basic gulf in that they did it and we didn't.
The players played it, the writers wrote about it, and the photographers shot pictures, like these of the 1934 World Series, so the next morning in the paper, the fans could see it. In the days before the telephoto lens, photographers stood on the field, both before and during the game, to get the best pictures possible. Dario Lodigiani.
Oh, yes, lots of photographers. God almighty, yes. I remember when they had those great big box cameras when you wound them up, and when they snapped them, they sound like a bomb went off. Sure, they were all over the place.
Then, of course, there was radio.
This is Byram Saab at the microphone, and together with Mel Allen, we're ready to send your way all of the action of the second game of the World Series. Here in Chicago.
Your neighborhood Texaco service station welcomes you to another baseball broadcast brought to you direct from Comiskey Park by permission of the Chicago White Sox and the Boston Red Sox to stimulate interest in our national game and in your local team. And now out to Comiskey Park and Hal Taunton, who is going to give us some inside information on today's game.
Hello again, everybody. This is Harry Cowrie, greeting you for your radio host, the Gillette Safety Razor Company, bringing you this great all-star baseball game.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and hello, baseball fans everywhere. This is Jimmy Dudley at the Polo Grounds in New York, greeting you for the
Joe Garagiola.
The broadcasters became bigger than some of the players, most of the players. I mean, you go to Cincinnati and pretty soon they'll tell you about Wade Hoyt and rain delays, great stories he would tell.
Hello, baseball fans. This is Wade Hoyt. Yes, indeed, today's game is to be played right here at Crosley Field, which has been the home of the Cincinnati Reds for as long as the oldest citizen I remember.
France Locks in St. Louis, I can remember him talking about the bulging biceps of Ducky Medwick. I couldn't wait to see Medwick. Kurt Gowdy in Boston.
There's a long poke in the deep right center field, way back, way back. Pearsall leaping up, and he wraps him with a home run.
In every city, the voices of the game were prominent.
They'll be roaring on every pitch today.
A great throng of enthusiastic St. Louis fans has turned out for the second game of the 1944 World
Very colorful
Series.
picture is transpiring right in front of us. The American Legion band of the...
The city has been eating, sleeping, and talking World Series for weeks, and has packed every available...
The municipality of St. Louis and the banks of the mighty Mississippi is indeed the baseball capital of the world for 1944.
Every day they were coming into your house, and even though you never met them personally, they were your friends.
Good afternoon, baseball fans. This is Mel Allen. The final game of the 1952 World Series.
Radio was especially important at World Series time.
This is Red Bob at Yankee Stadium in New York as the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Yankees get set.
The games were always played during the day, and people followed the series by listening at work or at school. Actor Billy Crystal.
I remember Mr. McAllis, history teacher. Excuse me, Mr. McAllis, I have a terrible upset stomach. Can I go to the bathroom? First one, it worked. 5 minutes later, Mr. McAllis, I'm not feeling, can I? Go ahead. This went on for 3 times. It started to go out the 4th time. Mr. McAllis said, Mr. Crystal, at least when you come back, would you give us all the score? Okay.
This is the first game of the 1938 World Series. Every seat for the 2 days here in Chicago has been sold out. And Wrigley Field seats 43,660. So there are that many here today.
Haywood Hale Broom.
The World Series and the Kentucky Derby were the 2 things that happened at just the right time. The first big race, which meant the spring, and the 7 games, which meant the autumn. And these were in tune with the rhythm of the people and their games. Yes, I think the whole country kind of stopped and paid attention to the series.
Especially the players, who embraced the chance to perform on center stage.
I have a rendezvous this fall on some World Series battleground where I will gladly take the mound to pitch my team to victory. I have a rendezvous this fall, and that is where I long to be. God knows that nervousness will creep into my heart, but I have a rendezvous this fall to capture baseball's grandest prize and start to take my rightful place as one of baseball's honored few. And I'll not fail that rendezvous.
In the country of baseball, men rise to glory in their 20s and their early 30s, a garland briefer than a girl's, or at least briefer than a young woman's, and then the long meadow slopes downward. In the country of baseball, time is the air we breathe, and the wind swirls us backward and forward until we seem so reckoned in time and seasons that all time and all seasons become the same. Citizens of the country of baseball retire, yet they never retire. They live in continual twilight, paler and fainter than the noon of games.
I met a lad, handsome and witty, who whispered to me, "You are so pretty." Soon he and I were cabareting. We had a good time, goes without saying. I tried to get him in my sweet embrace. All he had on his mind was the pen and trace. And though I saw him practically every night, we never went to movies or saw a fight. We just saw baseball, baseball, DiMaggio and baseball, baseball, Chicago Cubs, baseball, baseball, DeRocher and baseball, baseball.
At a time when a baseball player's wage wasn't much more than the average American's, ceremonies like this one honoring Cardinal pitcher Lon Warneke were understandably low-key. In fact, after a 10-year career, to most major leaguers, a shotgun and a couple of hunting dogs was a fine reward. Haywood Hale Broun.
Most of them were farmers, and what most of them hoped to get out of baseball was in the 6 or 7 years of an average career to save enough money to buy 40 more acres or replace 2 mules with a tractor. Or if you came from a town, to buy a hardware store. Baseball players are very strong for buying hardware stores because the stock wasn't perishable. Oranges rot, nails don't.
In the years after the Depression, major leaguers, like most citizens, put in an honest day's work. Writer Robert Creamer.
Just look at those faces. In every face, I don't think there was an ounce of fat in any of those faces. They were all lean and hard. They were guys who had scrambled all their lives. You could just tell that. You didn't really know major league players, but they seemed approachable. They seemed more real.
If ball players seemed more approachable in the 40s and 50s, it was precisely because money hadn't yet distanced them from the common man. In fact, theirs was a lifestyle that most people could relate to. Joe Garagiola.
We worked in the wintertime, like everybody else did. It was not unusual, when you travel especially, to ride to the Polo Grounds in the subway. Take the subway to Brooklyn. So if a fan left the ballpark, he'd sit there and he'd talk to you and he'd say, "How's at the game today? Why did you swing? Why did you take a third strike?" That kind of thing. And pretty soon, you struck up a friendship. And we were working stiffs who happened to be Major League Baseball players.
Nowhere was the spirit of kinship between player and fan more evident than it was in Brooklyn, a community that adored its Dodgers. Broadcaster Red Barber.
Brooklyn had been looked down on, especially by Manhattan with the tall buildings, with Broadway, and Brooklyn was called the bedroom of New York. The one thing that Brooklyn had, which they could strike back at Manhattan, was the ball club, the Brooklyn Dodgers.
In Brooklyn, the passion to root for the Dodgers seemed to have been acquired at birth, an unbroken chain handed down from generation to generation. Stephen Longstreet.
It was a crusade. It was a fetish. It was paranoia. Them bums. Ebbets Field. It was like a religion, that's what it was. It wasn't a sport, it was a religion.
Ebbets Field had the famous heckler Hilda Chester and an off-key band known as the Symphony. Before every home game, Happy Felton's Knothole Gang played on television, all of which contributed to the legendary infatuation that Brooklyn had with its team. Donald Honig.
The Dodgers bespoke Brooklyn around the world, because if you remember all those old World War II movies, there was always somebody in there. Somebody in the platoon was from Brooklyn, and he would be worrying about the Dodgers. The team was a very important part of the community, and their neighbors, who they would see in the supermarket and in the playground playing with their children, were Brooklyn Dodgers. They lived in the neighborhood.
Pitcher Carl Erskine.
The Brooklyn team to the Brooklyn fan was family. Abe Meyerson, who owned a little deli, and Abe had a bunch of kids. And I know he wasn't wealthy by any means, probably starving. But every time I'd pitch, Abe Meyerson would be at my door. He'd bring me 2 big grocery bags full of deli groceries. And he'd say, "Here, Carl, I can't take that, Abe. Why would you give me that? Oh, you guys shouldn't pay rent. You shouldn't have to pay anything to be in Brooklyn."
In the late 40s, the Dodgers were not only one of baseball's most beloved teams, they were rapidly becoming one of the best. And part of the reason was the arrival of Jackie Robinson in 1947. Red Barber.
The Brooklyn fan is eternally hopeful. He wants this ball player to do well so the Dodgers can do well. And if Robinson could do well, that was just fine. And once Robinson demonstrated his ability, once he started dancing down off first base, and my goodness, Ebbets Field went wild, and every eye was on him. The players accepted Robinson grudgingly, but as he demonstrated his ability on the playing field, they suddenly realized he might lead them to a pennant.
While the Dodgers continued their progressive ways by adding players like Roy Campanella and Don Newcombe, Brooklyn's Boys of Summer found themselves in 6 World Series during Jackie's 11 years. Each time the Dodgers faced the Yankees, and in the process created one of baseball's most treasured rivalries. 2 teams joined forever in their excellence.
The two together make me think of October, of shortstops dueling in Ebbets Field in the late afternoon shadows of Yankee Stadium, while we argued who was better, Rizzuto or Reese. Like choosing between 2 words with almost the same meaning, astounding or amazing, incandescent or luminous, Rizzuto or Reese.
Unfortunately for the Dodgers and their fans, the rivalry proved to be one-sided. Brooklyn lost to the Yankees in 1947, 49, 52, and again in 1953. The team finally came away triumphant in 1955, winning an epic 7-game series. But just 3 years later, the Dodgers were gone. Sadly, they had been taken away from the borough that loved them.
Don't tear the treasured ballpark down. Long has it brought me joy, as many a Brooklyn player has that I've watched as a boy. Above it rings Red Barber's voice, amidst the crowd's deep roar, the summer sounds that would be heard by Brooklyn fans no more. Oh, let the mighty field stand as tribute to her past. The loyalty of all her fans can never be surpassed. Forget the California gold, let loyalty prevail. For loyalty of Brooklyn fans can never be for sale.
But yesterday I watched them start, young wonders all in serried row. By now I've seen them all depart. The years flow faster than we know. Today, fresh from the corner lot, we praise some youngster on the team. Tomorrow's page will know him not. The years flow faster than we dream.
Every city had its baseball heroes. In New York, if you chose to be a Yankee fan during the 1950s, your hero was Mickey Mantle. Billy Crystal.
I felt that when I went to a game in Yankee Stadium, that Mickey Mantle knew that I was in the ballpark. I strongly felt that he was saying to himself, I better have a good day today. Bill's here. Damn, I don't feel good either. I gotta get a hit or steal a base or throw somebody out. He paid his $350. Mickey Mantle was everybody's hero. He was who you wanted to be. I mean, I walk like him, I talk like him. I did my bar mitzvah with a drawl, you know. He was a stunning athlete to watch.
So too were many other stunning athletes, who through the years were heroes around the country as well. Donald Honig.
Now, baseball has its own private universe with its own deities, its own Lucifers, its own fallen angels. Babe Ruth, of course, is the deity.
Haywood Hale Broun.
When Miller Huggins was managing the Yankees, Miller got sore because Babe was not showing up for batting practice. And he said to the then traveling secretary, Mark Roth, if that big bum doesn't show up for batting practice, I'm really going to tear him apart. Well, 5 minutes before game time, he came in shedding camel's hair, throwing his cap, his coat. Went out and hit a home run, 2 doubles and a single or something. And Roth, who was something of a troublemaker, said after the game, hey, Miller, you're going to say something to Babe about not making batting practice? Go on. Miller said, yes, I was. Hey, Babe. Yes. Hi, Babe. He was the hero in excelsis. I mean, he was in his appetites overpowering, in his play overpowering, in his joy in life overpowering.
A writer once said that to capture Ruth with cold statistics would be like trying to keep up with him on a night out. His unparalleled ability and unmatched personality on and off the field made him a tremendous attraction everywhere he went. New York Yankee, Frank Crosetti.
Every time I go to the bat, I try to hit a home run because I know the people come out to see me hit a home run, which they did. They did. And when he'd strike out, and I mean he struck out, he really will. And they would even get a charge when he struck out. They would yell even on that. I think there's only one number that should ever be retired from the Little League clear on up to the Major Leagues, and that's Babe's number 3. I think that the game owes that to the Babe.
3 years after Ruth retired, he became a first base coach for the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1938, more for his value as a public attraction than a baseball man. Nearly a decade later, he was stricken with throat cancer. Haywood Hale Broun.
He shrank away and was a shadow, but in Greek myths, heroes always die in battle, which is as perhaps it should be. They have died in the fullness of their strength. They have never shrunken, they have never grown old. The old athlete is almost always an object of pity. Brief is the season of man's delight, but at that moment, just as Gehrig said, this is the happiest day of my life when he was dying. What is now coursing through you is not the thin blood of the last days of your life, but the flood of memories of the things you did when you were there.
Babe Ruth made his last appearance in a Yankee uniform in June of 1948, moving tribute to a man and an era now long gone.
The only real game, I think, in the world, baseball. There's been so many lovely things said about me, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to thank everybody. Thank you.
Broadcaster Mel Allen.
2 months later, Babe passed away. The people were lined up all around Yankee Stadium, many with babies in their arms, waiting to pass by and pay their last respects to Babe Ruth. I went over to one gentleman and I said, "You'll forgive me, sir, but I said, why would you bring your baby with you?" He said, "Well, when he grows up, I can tell him that he saw the greatest baseball player of all time."
Game called. Across the field of play, the dusk has come, the hour is late. The fight is done, and lost or won, the player files out through the gate. The tumult dies, the cheer is hushed, the stands are bare, the park is still. But through the night there shines the light of home beyond the silent hill.
Game called, where in the golden light the bugle rolled the reveille. The shadows creep where night falls deep, and taps has called the end of play. The game is done, the score is in. The final cheer and jeer have passed, but in the night beyond the fight, the player finds his rest at last.
Game called. Upon the field of life, the darkness gathers far and wide. The dream is done, the score is spun, that stands forever in the guide. Nor victory, nor yet defeat, is chalked against the player's name. But down the roll, the final scroll shows only how he played the game.
in association with Black Canyon Productions. This has been a presentation of HBO Sports, the network of champions.